Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Development Control meeting. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear of the room or behind me. Please exit the room and meet in the War Memorial Park. The meeting is being webcast live on the internet and will be available to view on YouTube after the meeting. And if everybody could turn their mobile phones off or to silent, please. For the benefit of members of the public watching or participating in this meeting, I would like to explain who everyone is. My name is Councillor Nick Robinson and I am chairing tonight's meeting. To my right are councillors who will be making decisions on the application on this evening's agenda. To my immediate right and left are officers who will be presenting the applications and providing advice to the committee. The Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee and not a political meeting. The committee will be considering the published papers, examining the evidence brought before us tonight, and will make decisions based on planning reasons. We are guided by national and local planning policy and guidance. At the appropriate time, I will invite speakers to contribute to the meeting in the order set out in the update paper. May I ask all speakers, including visiting members, to speak clearly and to keep points made on the application on material reasons only. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning has finished. All speakers will be reminded of their permitted speaking time and will be advised when they have 1 minute remaining. May I ask all committee members to avoid repetition and keep any comments on each planning item to a maximum of 4 minutes. This evening we have just one item on the agenda and I really hope to finish by 8:30. I understand that planning can be emotive and ask that everyone remains polite and professional throughout this meeting. Thank you. Right. Apologies for absence and substitutions. I have apologies from Councillor McCormick. I have Councillor Phillimore sitting in for substituting for Councillor Durrant, and I have Councillor Taylor substituting Councillor Faulkner. Are there any others? No? Good, thank you. Declarations of interest. Councillor Freeman.
I have to declare that I'm predetermined on this application and therefore will stand down from the committee and speak as a ward councillor.
Thank you. Urgent matters, I have none. No. Minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of October. I move that they are correct. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Court. I will sign those at the end of the meeting. Applications for planning. We have one, land at Winklebury Regeneration, Winklebury Way, Basingstoke. So, if you could introduce the application.
Thank you, Chair. This is a full application for the redevelopment of the Winklebury Centre, the former Fort Hill School, Newnham Bassett site, the open space at Carrisbrook Close and the former Play Council site to provide 203 dwellings, 652 square metres retail space, 706 square metre medical centre and a 271 square metre community facility plus open space, parking and landscaping. The net increase in dwellings would be 134 dwellings, of which 40% would be affordable units in accordance with our policy, and this would result in 54 units, of which 29 would be for social rent, 13 as first homes and 12 intermediate. In addition to the above, the applicant has also confirmed that the 69 units at the Winklebury Centre would be re-provided as affordable units, and this would be secured through the Section 106 agreement. As a result, 61% of the units would be affordable. The proposals would also result in a long-term maintenance plan for the scheduled monument, a relocated and enlarged play area, plus 4.5 hectares of open space. If I could just go through the plans. So this is the first site, this is the Fort Hill site. This is for 66 dwellings and for a preschool and play area, and the area to the right, that's the open space, and this is the area where you can see a blue ring that goes round, and that's the scheduled monument. That map there, on the view-in, there was a discussion, there was a question over the location of the Oaklands Way play area, and this plan is also on the update paper, and it shows the blue star is where the proposed play area would go, the enlarged play area. Carisbrooke Close play area, which would be removed. Up to the north is the Oaklands Way play area, and then I've also identified 3 other play areas: Tiverton Road, Winklebury Park, and the Sycamore Way play area. If we go on to the next one, this is the division of the affordable housing at Fort Hill, and then we've got some street scenes of the proposed dwellings up at Fort Hill. This is the preschool layout, so you can see that the preschool has also got its own private play area as well associated with the school, and it's got parking as well. And then that's the elevations of the preschool. Skip through those. So the next site moving down, this is the Newnham Bassett site, and this is for 5 bungalows that you can see located there off the existing access at Coppice Mews. And that's the design of the bungalows. That's right. So then moving down, this is the Carisbrooke Close site. This is where there's an existing play area in the bottom left-hand corner of the site, and this would be redeveloped with 11 dwellings, and these are 2-storey dwellings. And then this is the Winklebury Centre site. So you have 2 blocks, Block A and Block B, which would replace the existing buildings that are there. The former pub and the church will remain. Those are outside of the application site. The Block B in the ground floor, that's where the community facility would be located. And then these are some elevations of the proposed buildings. And then that plan there was a query on site on the viewing panel in terms of the existing heights of the buildings compared to what's been proposed. So I've highlighted in yellow, that's the height of the existing Winklebury Centre. And then you can see that essentially it's the top floor that's above the height of the existing, and that's stepped in by about 3 metres as well around the edges. If I can then go back to the update paper. So if I draw your attention to the update paper, we've got the viewing panel report, plus we've received a final comment from the Urban Design Officer, and no objections are raised. Further comments have been raised by Councillor Compton Burnett, and they're within the update paper, plus as an appendix as well. And then there's also a response from the applicant's highway consultant on the parking. I draw your attention on page 5. There's comments from Hampshire County Council, who have considered all the information, and they still raise no objection to the proposals. We've had 5 further letters of objection, some repeating previous comments, and then there's some additional comments below. Then on page 6, it's responses to queries that were raised at the viewing panel. So there are 4, which was where was the playing field contribution to be spent, the clarification of the number of trees to be removed, the location of the play area, and also of the height of the proposed flats in comparison to the existing Winklebury Centre. And then on page 7, there's some changes to the conditions. So condition 9 has been amended to remove the length of the delivery vehicles because they vary in length. So Hampshire County have confirmed that they're happy to have it so that the details are submitted before development commences at Winklebury Centre. Condition 20 has been amended because it duplicated the construction hours and the delivery hours, which were already in condition 33 and 34. The requirement for biodiversity net gain, the 28.24%, that's now secured through 106 agreements and not via conditions, so that condition 31 has been removed. Condition 37 restricts the opening hours for the retail units at the new Winklebury Centre, and that's to also include Sundays. The original one said Monday to Saturday. And then with regards to the community infrastructure requirements, there's an update there, as I've already mentioned, that the existing 64 affordable units at Winklebury would be re-provided on site, and that would be secured through the 106 agreement. There would be a requirement for contribution towards allotments, and also just confirming that the biodiversity net gain is secured through the 106 agreement. So there's a revised recommendation, and then in addition to that, the legal agreement would also secure a phasing plan. So whilst there is a condition as in the officer's report, it would also be covered in the section 106 agreement. So subject to those minor changes, the officer's recommendation is for approval.
Thank you, Sue. If we could have our first speakers, which is Mr. Peters and Mr. Fitzpatrick, to the chairs just in front of the rail over there, please. Yeah. Yes, please. Good evening to you both. You have 4 minutes between you, so I will give you a nudge after 2 minutes so that you know if you want to swap over, but stress it is 4 minutes between you. And the microphone button is the right-hand button on the deck in front of you. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm the chairman of the Winklebury and Manydown Community Action Group and the Winklebury Regeneration Review Panel. The Winklebury Regeneration Review Panel report, which was published on the 26th of October 2022, concluded that this application is in breach of at least 17 different BDBC policies. Some examples of these breaches are the massive under-provision of parking on the Winklebury Centre site, which will lead to a significant impact on the local highway network. The proposed new and much higher buildings on the Winklebury Centre will be built closer to the properties in Warwick Road than the SPD allows. The proposed medical centre is named as a benefit of the plans, yet the number of caveats in the ICB letter cast doubt on whether it can be taken on by them, and the concerns raised by the Design Out Crime Officer have been completely ignored by Vivid, which breaches policy EM10. There isn't a management plan in place for the protection of the scheduled ancient monument, which is a breach of policy EM11 on heritage. This proposal will only repeat the mistakes of the past. Other regenerations in Basingstoke are resident-led. This one has been, to quote Vivid, unashamedly housing-led. This application is contrary to policy SS2 regeneration, as it has not been the subject of positive engagement with the local community. There have been a few meetings with stakeholders and an open event, but this is very much a case of quantity over quality. A lot of work was done on the original master plan in 2019, which was welcomed by all the stakeholders. Then, after behind-the-scenes discussions, suddenly everything changed. The community were presented with very different plans to those previously discussed. The residents of Winklebury deserve to be treated the same way other Basingstoke residents have been. So we ask respectfully that you refuse this application. Thank you.
My name's Paul Fitzpatrick of Blue Haze, Winklebury Way, Basingstoke. I do apologise for not selling my property to Vivid behind me. Anyway, obviously you're doing the next best thing, which is blocking me in. It's bad enough as it is. It's invading my privacy. This is a continuation of the 1969 compulsory purchase era when we were forced to sell our land. I have also to give you notice that I've just sent off to have the listing area extended. I've studied the area intently and it's a complete mess. It needs to be reassessed. It really does, and I've got all the evidence. Yes, we are not very happy with Vivid. I can't understand the partnership agreement between you and Vivid. You haven't bothered to tell me anything. The trees in front of my property, some of them have got weak where there was a fire, unfortunately, because of confidential paperwork left in a cupboard. I feel I'm being coerced out of my property. I think this is very embarrassing for Vivid just behind me to hear me go on like this. I do apologise for still being alive. Thank you very much. I think that's all I've got to say.
Thank you. Questions for the speakers? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And if we could have the applicants, Mr. Waterfield and Mr. Lyons, please. And I have got you down as having a transport consultant with you as well. If you could come up as well. You're listed as being there to answer questions rather than a speaker. So, thank you. You will have 4 minutes between you. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm John Waterfield from Vivid. Our vision for Winklebury is substantial. This regeneration proposal is critical to realising our shared ambition to house local people from the growing housing register. We are committed to 60% affordable homes, mostly social rented, and we can do this because we have secured grant funding for them. We're also offering desperately needed bungalows and 4-bed houses. This application will provide community access to 4.5 hectares of new green open space. We're providing new commercial areas, community and recreational spaces and new homes. We plan to invest around £48 million, but that's based on this application being approved tonight. We have tried to address residents' and stakeholders' concerns. We have increased the amount of community space proposed from 178 square metres to 278 square metres. We're offering 106 monies for a manager to run the community centre to build up community activities. We have committed to providing 550 square metres of surgery space. We've been guided by the ICB, and whilst we recognise their financial difficulties, we will continue to engage with them beyond this application. We hear how important these facilities are to the community, and we'll carry on working on this vital local provision to deliver a future-proofed surgery. The housing will be eco-friendly and cheap to run. High-quality landscaping, improving biodiversity and active travel are fundamental in our proposals. The build quality of the housing we are proposing is a huge priority for us. Sustainability is a key factor involving EV charging and renewable energy. Supporting the officer's recommendation will allow us to create a new, vibrant and modern community and 134 extra homes for Winklebury, 203 homes overall. We have addressed all the key planning concerns and your officers confirmed we have addressed all the material considerations. I think it's really important to say that if you improve this application tonight, we will commit to working closely with the council, ward councillors and the community to make it a scheme we can all be proud of.
Good evening, councillors. My name is Dr. Chris Lyons and I'm a director at SLR Consulting, advising Vivid on their planning strategy. As you've heard, the proposals offer a net increase in 134 dwellings, which is not large enough to normally require any significant new infrastructure in a site of this size. Nevertheless, Vivid are proposing to deliver a scheme that will provide many benefits to the local community. These include 123 affordable homes in an area of acute affordable housing need, a new community space, and Vivid have listened to the local community and councillors and, as you've heard, agreed to increase this size. This will be a modern, flexible space that can adapt over time to meet the needs of different local groups. It is large enough to provide different sizes of meeting rooms so both small groups can have rooms to meet and then larger community events can also be hosted.
You have 1 minute remaining.
There's an office, kitchen area, storerooms and toilets to ensure events can be delivered. New retail units which will offer high quality space facing onto the new square and the main road to give better visibility to the shops and therefore improve their viability. A new doctor's surgery designed to the requirements of the ICB, and this is what they have told us is required to meet the health needs of the local community. We are providing what they have asked for. Improvements to the scheduled ancient monument with a clear management plan going forwards and with interpretation boards. A new larger play area and over 4.5 hectares of public open space, which will now be available to the public. This improved play area will be overlooked, safe to use, and is less than 5 minutes walk from the existing one. A brand new preschool in a purpose-built building that will operate for additional weeks throughout the year and also for longer hours each day. We know some people would like even larger community and health facilities and other benefits, and while we do understand those desires, the development in front of you cannot be expected to deliver those aspirations given its size. I trust you'll support this important regeneration project that I believe will deliver a scheme that residents of Winkelby will be proud of in years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for the speakers, and could I remind you, we're not here to redesign it. Questions will be on things that are relevant to this. It's not a question of, would it be better if, because it's black and white, this is what's on the table, and we either say yes or we say no. So, questions. Councillor Bound, followed by Councillor Miller, followed by Councillor Hussey. Councillor Bound.
Good evening. There seems to be a little bit of aggravation on the part of the objectors and possibly the councillors as well about the amount of consultation that occurred in relation to this planning application. What measures did you take to really engage with the local community and the councillors?
The first community consultation event took place in June 2018 at the Winkelbury Gala. We then had the launch of the project in February 2020, just before COVID. We continued to engage over the COVID period, issuing a number of community newsletters, 4 to be precise, and a couple of webinars as well over that period. And so we've also had follow-up meetings and webinars with the councillors, with the Manydown community and Winkelbury Community Action Group during the process. And we've had an FAQ, a frequently asked questions, and a web page on our website throughout the whole periods, and a dedicated email line that people can message me and get answers. And so we've been pretty, we've followed our normal procedures on this.
So there's been no face-to-face really with interested parties since COVID, is that right?
We've had face-to-face meetings with the Manydown and Winkelbury Community Action Group. We've had 2 of those, and we've had consultation and face-to-face meetings with all the stakeholders, like the Integrated Care Board and Hampshire and the other stakeholders.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chairman. The councillors, not only on this committee, but other councillors, we've been facing other developers recently about their intentions when they bring along their plans. And as this is a full application, if you indulge me, please, Chairman, that I'd like to go in a little bit more detail. You mentioned EV and regeneration. Other developers have mentioned that when they put their developments in, at the very least, they would put in the ducting that would be required to the properties to save anything, the usual syndrome that's gone on over years past, that you put a road in, but they do dig it up and put the ducting in. Do you have plans for that? So there's two parts to this. And your solar panel policy, whether you're going to look at the orientation that you've indicated in the various drawings, and whether you'll be installing solar panels from the outset in the various properties.
Yeah, if I can pick up on the EV charging point, as part of the Winkelbury site, there will be EV charging points for all parking spaces within there. And as part of the Fort Hill site, there will be one every 2 parking spaces. Is my... Oh, sorry. Which bit do you want me to highlight? Okay, yeah, so there will be sufficient EV ports across the site.
I specifically asked about the ducting to each one because you don't know what's going to come along in the future. If the future does encapsulate EV vehicles for most households.
So the EV ports will already be there, so the ducting will also be there. There won't be a requirement to retrofit EV because it will already be there in the first instance.
There will be PV photovoltaic panels on the roof of the 2 blocks of flats in the Winklebury Centre. There isn't necessarily a requirement to put them on the houses because we would go for a fabric first approach. So the insulation layers on the buildings themselves will be sufficient. But if we need PV panels, then the buildings are correctly orientated to enable them to be put on if required. But they're not, we don't fit them unless we absolutely have to fit them, unless we're required to fit them.
Councillor Hussey.
You mentioned 122 affordable homes. Can you give me a breakdown, please? How many of those will be at social rent levels?
Of the 203 homes, we're providing 60% of those at social housing. So 54 of those are going to be Section 106 homes. And then there'll be 29 of that 54. 29 of them will be rent or social rent. 12 will be shared ownership and 13 will be first homes. That's the 54 Section 106 homes. Then there'll be the 69 Winklebury replacement homes. And the plan is, well, there's 34 one beds and 35 two beds, and they'll be social rent. And then we have about 80 that are, at the moment, they're not necessarily allocated, but potentially they could be, we've sort of indicatively proposing that perhaps 36 could be market, 26 rent and 18 shared ownership. So we've kind of got a schedule of accommodation for them already in our minds.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. Could I ask you about the dental surgery? I understand there's been one in Winklebury for 40 years, but I noticed there isn't one particularly in your scheme. The reason I ask this, to be honest, is that over 3 years ago, it must be, during my time as mayor, I had a plea from the dentists. And they said, you know, that you're obviously rebuilding everything, and they didn't think that there was going to be accommodation for them, and they were trying to get hold of you to find out what was going to happen. Thank you.
Over the years, I've had off and on dialogue with the dentist. They're a private dentist, and the last time I spoke to them, or the time, well, they were talking to me about wanting some space, and I said, well, we've got plenty of space. If you want some space in the 600 plus metre squared retail, then you can have some space. We'll work it out. Okay, fine. Then the next thing, I get a message saying that they're actually leaving and they're going to a private dental, another private firm somewhere else in Winklebury. Okay, fair enough. And then last week, I hear that they actually do want to be part of it, and I'm more than willing to re-engage them again if they want to be part of the new Winklebury, all in due course. But we are talking, 2 or 3 years from that position. So we're not going to be, all things being equal, it will be March 26 before we start work at the Winklebury Centre itself. So we'll talk to them in the meantime. But I'm very happy to have a chat with them.
Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. My experience is that Vivid's relationship with its current tenants is not perfect. So what makes you think that this is a flagship development, and what is the adaptability you're building into these homes to allow for them to be lifetime homes, so as you build a community that sticks?
We think that we've worked very, we're using a a highly respected firm of architects to produce designs that are modern but at the same time reflect the architectural language of the Winkelbury centre and the Winkelbury area, but at the same time they make a statement that they are modern and this is the new Winkelbury. This is something that is that we can, in a sense, say goodbye to the past. The Winkelbury Centre itself is of a design that needs to be improved and is we are comfortable and confident that that is what these new designs will do. We've done very similar schemes elsewhere in Fareham and in other parts of Hampshire that have actually really worked well and have revitalised the area with community space, with retail units, with flats above, and designing out crime, and just being far more sustainable and much cheaper to run than the one. If you imagine what those flats are like now, the heat just steams out of them, and so for our tenants, our Vivid tenants, that's not a good place for them to be with the cost of living as it is. So. For that respect, it is a generation opportunity for our residents and to provide more housing that has not been provided in Winkelbury. No affordable housing for a staggeringly long time has been provided, except the ones that we provided at Harlock Hall recently, on a site that was no longer fit for purpose. Let's not forget that. So, sorry, was there a second point to that question? I think I might have covered it.
It's about the adaptability. Are you building in adaptability within these homes? Because people who want to stay in the house so as they can stay for longer if it's adaptable.
Sure. We work to lifetime home standards. They're not necessarily. There used to be a requirement of the of Homes England, our main regulator, but we still follow those, and we adapt nationally defined scheme standards, space standards. So they allow for flexibility and future growth. There's spaces in our flats for electric buggies. There's outside space. There's all the flats have got their own balconies. The houses allow reasonably good and decent turning circles for any future wheelchair users. The bungalows at Fort Hill will have the ability to house some of your more vulnerable tenants who are wheelchair bound, who do need this extra support. So there are a lot of naysayers about our scheme, but actually it has a lot of positive benefits.
Councillor Phillimore.
Yeah, hi. The grant funding secured for the site, is that dependent on delivering the 60% affordable housing and specifically the social housing?
The social housing grant works for shared ownership and for social rented units, and it gives us the ability to flex the tenure, that additional grant, so that we can charge a lower rent. We get grant, so we can it offsets the build costs and the overall scheme costs, so that we can charge a lower rent. We have to borrow less money, so we can effectively subsidise the rent. So your residents will be able to enjoy paying more like what the council rents are, or would have been.
Councillor Taylor, second question.
Thank you very much. It's a simple question, really, but I noted that when one of the residents was speaking, they said that the initial master plan was okay and that they were sort of quite happy with it, and it suddenly all changed in 2019. Can you shed light on that? I mean, is it an obvious answer? Was that when Vivid took it on? What was the reason for that?
In the period up to 2018, we carried out an extensive review of all the sites available in the Winkelbury area. Around 16 sites were looked at and reviewed and put forward as a possible Winkelbury-wide master plan. those sites were gradually, I'm afraid, for various reasons, accessibility, for perhaps because they were open space or they were not available because of services or other reasons, discounted, and then so it left us kind of with the Winklebury lollipop, as we call it. And at that particular point in 2019, that's when Hampshire decided that they wanted to put the Winklebury Fort Hill site into the mix. So it gave us a huge shot in the arm to be able to focus on the central area.
Thank you. Any more questions? No? Thank you very much, gentlemen. If we could have Councillor Compton-Burnett, please. Good evening, Councillor. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
I wholeheartedly object to the proposed plans for the development at Winklebury. I respectfully ask the committee to refuse the application because it is contrary to several policies in our adopted local plan, including policies SS2, CN6, CN7, CN8, CN9, EM1, EM3, EM10 and EM11. I will focus on some of the reasons why the proposed plans are contrary to policies CN6, CN7 and CN8. Policy CN6. The proposals fail to comply with policy CN6 because they fail to demonstrate that the medical centre can be provided and phased to support the requirements of the proposed development. This failure is demonstrated by Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Integrated Care Board's response to these proposals, which states that the business case, leasing structure, funding structure and bill schedule for the medical centre have not been agreed. The proposals also fail to take advantage of the opportunity to share resources and premises between different services, such as the preschool sharing the community centre. Policy CN7. The proposals fail to comply with policy CN7 because the medical centre will not meet local needs. The Hampshire and Isle of Wight Integrated Care Board states that its letter to response to the plans should, and I quote, not be relied upon by the applicant in any way. So we must seek reassurance regarding the fitness for purpose of the proposed medical centre from elsewhere. NHS Building Note 1101, which provides best practice guidance on the design of new primary care buildings, states that there should be 14 clinical rooms for a catchment population of the size of Winklebury and Manydown, rather than the 9 clinical rooms in the applicant's plans. The proposed medical centre will not, therefore, meet local needs. Policy CN8. The proposals will reduce the quality and capacity of facilities valued by the community due to the permanent loss of the sports pitches, open space at Carisbrooke Close, Play Council building and Fort Hill Community Centre. The proposed community centre on the ground floor of the Winklebury Centre is not equivalent to or better than the Play Council facility and Fort Hill Community Centre, which will be lost permanently. The proposals also fail to take advantage of the opportunity to co-locate the community centre with open space on Fort Hill.
You have 1 minute remaining.
There is no assessment that clearly shows Carisbrooke Close playground and open space, the sports pitches, the Play Council and Fort Hill Community Centre to be surplus to requirements. The views on the local community on the losses have not been sought. In conclusion, this application falls far short of the requirements of policies CN6, CN7 and CN8. This Development Control Committee meeting should have been a forum of celebration in which residents and councillors came together to support an exciting community-led regeneration scheme for Winklebury. Instead, we are fighting to prevent a housing-led scheme being imposed upon us. This scheme contravenes a plethora of our local plans policies and will result in the permanent loss of many of our most valued community assets. I respectfully ask the committee to refuse the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Howard Sorrell, followed by Councillor Phillimore.
Sorry, can I just grab some water, please?
I'll start since you can hear me. Both CN7 and CN8 have a proviso saying that proposals will provide sufficient community benefit to outweigh the loss of the existing facility or service meeting evidence of a local need. Does that not apply here in your opinion then, based on everything that will be brought to the various sites across the application? That doesn't outweigh?
Sorry,
Sorry, I can ask it again if you need
yes,
to
please
check
say
your
it
notes.
again.
No,
Sorry,
that's fine. So specifically within CN7 and CN8, there is a proviso that says applications can be approved regardless of a lot of the points you made if there is evidence that they will provide sufficient community benefit that outweighs the loss. In your opinion, does that not apply here? Is the benefit that this application brings?
Absolutely not. Doesn't even come close to replacing the facilities that we are losing. We are being, the proposal says that we will not have new sports pitches. The open space that they say is new is not new. It was used by the community for years. And in terms of replacing the community facility at Fort Hill Community Centre and the Play Council building, instead of those wonderful facilities, we are being given a 271 square metre community centre in the ground floor of a block of flats.
Councillor Phillimore.
Yeah, hi, Abigail. Mine's on CN8 as well. Is it not a case that the old school playing fields were not publicly accessible, and the new open space will be a community open space, and that in terms is an increase of accessible open space by 4.5 hectares?
The open space was used by the community extensively. There were a lot of community activities at Fort Hill Community Centre, which was why it was called a community centre. So it is completely incorrect to say that the open space is new open space. It is not. It was used by the community as their open space.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. I'm going to the medical centre comments that you made. And on page 66 of the main report, Hampshire and Isle of Wight Integrated Care Board, I'm not going to read their paragraph, but it actually contradicts what you said. And I'm just wondering, if this is the officer's report, do you have a document that we're not privy to that says what you said?
It's publicly online, so it is the best practice guidelines that the NHS gives to anybody that is building a medical centre and designing a medical centre. There was also an update in 2023 in January which said that, I mean, I didn't include it all, so what I said was that we didn't have sufficient clinical rooms. In 2023 we were told that we not only had insufficient clinical rooms but that they should be bigger than the proposals that we're being given. So the proposals that we're given, half of them are just 12 metres squared. That is not big enough. It now states that they have to be 16 metres squared minimum if they are a clinical room. And there is no room for expansion in that medical centre.
All right, it didn't really answer my question because they say that there is proposed accommodation is appropriate for the size and layout to serve the general practice needs for the existing Winklebury residents and provide population growth for both Winklebury and Manydown.
Yes, but
that's what we have in our report.
Yes, so is your question that the medical centre that's proposed is for just Winklebury? Why are we saying it's for Manydown as well? I'm sorry.
I'm not saying anything. I'm saying that this is a statement from the Integrated Clinical Board.
So page 16, you're looking at, are you looking at the response that the Integrated Care Board gave to these plans Right, okay. Did you also read in the letter that the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Integrated Care Board submitted, which included that statement, we support it, right at the end of that letter, they said the applicant cannot use this letter as, I've got the wording, hang on a minute. Yes, here we go. The ICB's response, January 23, says that the lodging of this letter should not be relied upon by the applicant in any way and does not create any commitment, binding or otherwise, on the part of the Hampshire and Isle of Wight ICB.
Councillor Phillimore.
Sorry, one more. I'm a bit confused about this medical centre. This surgery doesn't have to cater for Manydown because Manydown's got a specific 106 agreement to develop with it.
In the Manydown outline plan, it was agreed that the medical facility for Manydown would be provided on Winklebury. Therefore, the facility on Winklebury has to cope with the patients for both Winklebury and Manydown. So that is a catchment population of 15,000 patients. That is echoed in the Hampshire and Isle of Wight CCG's primary care strategy, the latest version.
Councillor Howard Sorrell.
I don't want to keep harping on about this medical centre, but you said something a minute ago that made me curious. You talked about the 12 metres versus the 16 metres. You said this document was best practice, but unfortunately planning doesn't operate on best practice. We usually operate on legal minimums. Is it a best practice document or is it a legal minimum document? Because if it's a legal minimum, that's a reason that we could refuse this application. If it's not a legal minimum, it's irrelevant from a planning perspective at least.
Okay. So when I looked for the NHS property guidelines, I've looked for every single property document I could find that was regarding either the building notes, the NHS building notes cover all design and planning for NHS buildings. And the generic building note, 00, states that they have to be 16 metres squared. And the community and primary building note, it's the same. So the only documents that I could find that related to NHS building planning were those documents which said that we needed 14 clinical rooms rather than 9, and then there's an increased size. But if you want to, the increased size was probably more of guidance in January 2023. But if you want to look at the building notes, I can get them on my phone. You can have a look at them as much as you like. But they were the only ones that I could find. And with Hampshire and Isle of Wight, saying that they would not give any commitment to actually building the medical centre, there is also that that we can go on to realise that it's the medical centre is not the provision that we would hope it would be.
Okay. Are there any more questions for Councillor? Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. It's a sort of double question, but I'll ask it all at once. First of all, we heard from the Vivid representative that things were jogging along quite nicely with cooperation between everybody prior to 2019. And then suddenly it all went a bit pear-shaped with the consultations, etc., and people weren't so happy. And I was told that that was because Fort Hill came into the equation. I would have thought that that's a brilliant thing. I would have thought suddenly everything was really going to come together because what a marvellous site Fort Hill is. So that's my first thing just for you to comment on. But I just want to talk about this whole idea of community involvement because I noticed that the Vivid representative just said they're committed to working closely with councillors in the future. I'm kind of getting the vibe that that hasn't happened in the past, which is when it would have been really important to do it, especially in view of the regeneration policy, which says that it requires full involvement.
Councillor Taylor, could you ask your question?
Yes, sorry. So could you just comment on, first of all, do you feel there's been that full involvement that's required? And secondly, why 2019 Fort Hill came in and it didn't go better, it got worse? Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of consultation, public engagement, the consultations to which Vivid has referred, I've been at all of them, and they essentially involved Vivid telling local residents what they plan to do rather than listening to and working with local residents to develop best plans. And when we had face-to-face consultations, so the applicant referred to the Church of the Good Shepherd, and unfortunately the feedback that was presented from that face-to-face consultation did not reflect the comments that we understood had been made. And a number of us were there for the entire duration of that meeting. And we talked to lots of people. We saw them writing on the post-it notes. We did not recognise the feedback as what we had expected it would be, particularly regarding feedback regarding the community facilities and the medical centre. We also had a webinar. And unfortunately, the webinar questions were such that we could post a question, but then it was filtered. So many of the questions that I provided, other people provided, we never saw, and neither did anybody else. And so the information that we were getting was that it was all fine, all the questions were easy to ask, not complicated ones, about the community engagement, the community centre, that sort of thing. And I think that the best way of bringing all this together is to look at the petition that was signed by 840 residents in Winklebury last year that pleaded with the applicant to start working with the residents and stakeholders to improve the scheme. They were so upset at not having been listened to that they put together a petition, and within 2 weeks, 840 people, that's 15% of the adult population of Winklebury, had signed it. Even after that petition even after that petition had been submitted, a motion had been passed by council asking for a review and for the applicant to work with the residents and stakeholders. We still just got meetings which were telling us what was happening, but there was no sense of working together for a better solution. And lastly, on that point, I think that the experience of the dentist that you referred to earlier is illustrative of the experience that many local businesses and residents have had. She finished, I don't know whether any of you read the comments that she put online as an objection. She said, "We feel really let down by Vivid as we've been serving the community for the past 40 years. We were never taken into account about our views in the future." Yeah. In terms of Fort Hill, I was surprised at what I heard because there was a master plan was produced in 2018, which brought together really good work that had been done by the County Council, the NHS, Basingstoke and Dean, lots of work by the officers at Basingstoke and Dean, residents, Winklebury Community Action Group. Lots of people had come together and they all talked very fondly about those meetings, about how much they enjoyed listening to each other's points of views and coming up to a really good solution. And that solution was written up by the officers as a master plan. It was published in January 2019, and it shows a community centre. It was actually called a health and wellbeing hub on Fort Hill, which had really good community facilities, really good health facilities, and it was supported by the NHS CCG, which has now become the ICB. And everyone thought that it was a great idea, and it was included in the NHS's primary care transformation strategy, because that was what they saw as the way forward. So I'm surprised that the applicant said that Fort Hill had only come in 2019, because my understanding is it was in long before that, because that was, sorry, that was why they developed a master plan with a health and wellbeing hub on Fort Hill.
Thank you. Are there any more questions for the councillor? No. Thank you very much. Could you turn the microphone off, please? Could have Councillor Mamaliani. Thank you. Good evening to you. You have 4 minutes. I will remind you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for giving this opportunity to address the committee today. I'm here before you with an unwavering commitment to object this proposal. Yet another exceptional housing project in our beloved Winklebury. Now let's dive into the nitty-gritty of the planning policies. The officer recommendation is for permission, proposed development of Winklebury. However, for reasons outlined in policy EM10, which governs the high quality development in Fort Hill, I firmly believe we must respectfully ask the committee to look into these high quality aspects and refuse these applications on these grounds. Policy EM10 is a cornerstone in our fight for quality. It calls for high quality development, and rightly so. The North East Hampshire Design Panel, that's a beacon of our architectural alignment, weighed in with their concerns, dated 13th of October 2022. They described the site as exceptional, only to express their disappointment with the proposed scheme. They highlighted a plethora of issues which we should not take lightly. Their verdict was crystal clear. The layout and overall character of the proposed housing failed to match the quality of an exceptional site. And what's more, it doesn't appear that the design panel was even consulted on the revised layout, which by the way, doesn't seem to be fundamentally different from the scheme they initially responded to. Now let's dive into the next policy, EM11, which deals with heritage. The proposed development at Fort Hill, in all its exceptional glory, will have a significant impact on the setting of the scheduled ancient monument. The Council and Historic England themselves acknowledge the harm to the setting. The part that baffles us all is how they have conducted that there would be a limited harm to the ramparts. This conclusion is drawn in the absence of detailed management plan. The security fence, which currently provides a significant protection to the ramparts, is set to be removed without a concrete plan in place. In conclusion, as we dissect the technical details, it becomes abundantly clear that the benefits of this scheme, primarily for provision of modest addition to the housing supply and affordable housing, do not outweigh the harm it brings. The new medical center, though touted as a benefit, should be taken with a grain of salt, given the lack of certainty surrounding its delivery, as my colleague Councillor Crompton-Bump mentioned. So, my dear members, with the weight of policy numbers, design panel opinions, and heritage considerations, let's not trade our heritage for a mere handful of beans. It's time to say no to this housing project, and let's make our community proud by saying yes to the preserving the past and building a better future, all while keeping our architectural standards and heritage intact. Thank you for giving me the time.
Thank you. Questions for the councillor? Councillor Bound.
Just one. Relative to page 65 of the report, Historic England, no objection. Historic Environment Team, they note the conservation plan. The HET endorses the document and welcomes the principles and objectives of the plan. As such, no objection.
Put microphone on, please.
Sorry. Yes, the document they might have supported, they didn't really consider the security fence which is being removed and the impact of the security fence that is providing to protect the monument. And there are no plans how they are going to secure that monument after removing the security around this monument.
Any more questions? No? Thank you very much. Councillor Lee. Good evening, Councillor Lee. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to begin by saying I'm not against the premise of redevelopment of these sites. However, there are significant concerns and therefore I must strongly object to this application. In the time I have, I will outline critical points for refusal, though I don't have the time to cover all issues, and I urge committee members to ask questions where possible. This application directly contravenes CN8G, CN9H, EM5D, EM10A of our local plan, plus the parking SBD and the design and sustainability SBD, and additionally it contravenes section 8 paragraphs 92B and C, 99B, section 9 paragraph 104E of the NPPF. I'll try and address as much as I can. So paragraph 92 states that decisions should aim to achieve spaces that are B, safe and accessible so that crime and disorder and the fear of crime do not undermine the quality of life or community cohesion. Policy EM10 states that development proposals will be permitted where they A, contribute to the provision of neighbourhoods and places for work and leisure that are well connected, accessible and safe. The Design Out Crime Officer response states that the design of housing on Fort Hill does not conform to the policies as access to the rear gardens is poor and significantly increases the opportunities for crime and disorder. They add, Hampshire and Isle of Wight Constabulary cannot support the proposed layout. The officer also advises in a further submission to the revised plan submitted that their comments are still relevant, further adding that tackling violence against women and girls is both a government and police priority. With the proposed fallout of the enlarged community facility, there is no policing of the access door. This increases the opportunities for crime and disorder. Is it right, as white ribbon signatories, that we would support an application that puts the safety of women and girls at risk? Moving on, paragraph 92C continues, which enable and support healthy lifestyles, especially where this would address identified local health and well-being needs, for example, through the provision of safe and accessible green infrastructure. Policy CN8 gives acceptance to developments where G, any proposed replacement or improved facilities will be equivalent or better in terms of quality, quantity and accessibility. The Parks and Open Spaces Officer confirms that due to the removal of the open space on Carisbrooke Close, there are issues with distance thresholds as towards the southern end of the site, residents will need to travel further to open space than the standards allow for. Additionally, policy EM5 states proposals for the redevelopment of public and private open spaces will not be permitted unless it can be clearly demonstrated that D, replacement areas will be at least equivalent in terms of quality, quantity and accessibility, and there will be no overall negative impact on the provision of green infrastructure.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you. Noting again the comments from the Parks and Open Space Officer that there is significant deficiency of existing MFGS in Winklebury, it is important to note that this scheme will result in the loss of existing open space. The opening of Fort Hill cannot be considered new open space as it was already well used by the community when it was a school and community centre prior to it being closed by HCC and the applicant. Regarding parking, I hope that the site visit last week was useful for the committee. At present, the parking strategy is fundamentally flawed. The report indicates that across the whole site there are 374 parking spaces, which falls well short of the required amount calculated using the parking SPD, a document that we should not pick and choose when to apply and when not to. In some locations, according to the plans, there has been an over-provision and in others a massive under-provision, visible from the papers in front of you. It is also important to note that the applicant has failed to take into account existing demands such as the church, the adjacent school and the nursery. This demonstrates a poor understanding of the need of the community, and I urge committee members to take these factors into account and refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Councillor Lee? Councillor Phillimore.
Yeah, cheers, Alex. I think safety is subjective. Is there any material proof that safety is compromised?
So the Design Out Crime Officer response said that the layout of the gardens where access is shared is already, it proposes an issue for the safety of people. That's a design out crime officer. It's through their instincts as an officer in that capacity to be able to make those comments. And I'm assuming that the officer has seen crimes committed when plans are in that sort of state. So additionally, the community centre, whilst it is welcome that it has been enlarged, having no policing, again, they've already said that there's no policing of the front door, and I can only assume by their knowledge of working with the police and crime that this does present an issue to safety.
I'm only going on information in front of us in the report, but Hampshire County Council as consultee have confirmed that parking on offer is enough and adequate.
What Hampshire County Council, they've agreed that the method that they've used in terms of the census data from 2011 confirms that there would be enough space then. If you have a look at 2023 census, or sorry, 2021 census data, if that's right, it actually puts an under provision by about 30 to 40 spaces, and that's not taking into account a policy that has been agreed in this council, the parking supplementary policy, which we as a council have agreed. I don't think we should just tear that up based on one application, use it in another application. It's there for a reason. As councillors, we get enough in our inboxes about parking. Where there is an under provision is down at the Winklebury Centre, which houses the flats, the church that hasn't been accounted for, the nursery that hasn't been accounted for, and then there's just an expectation that existing roads will be able to take the pressure should that then get full up. I don't think that's acceptable.
Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. You would accept that design can help in terms of more and better lighting. And having walked around on the site viewing, you would accept that it is overgrown and the layout is poor in terms of lighting, both as it sits at the back of the Winklebury Centre, which is unsafe for females vulnerable to exit and enter their cars. So can you accept that the paperwork we have in front of us of designing out crime is actually quite substantive in that, or are you still pushing back on that?
I mean, the papers in front of you, the report says that the design out crime officer has given no objections, and yet if you have a look at the comments that they actually made to the planning application, they state that they cannot support the design for Fort Hill, that there is significant concerns around the policing of the front door. I will stand here and say, and I'm sure many of the other councillors will say, that the site needs redevelopment. We know that it's been in need of redevelopment for 20 plus years. The reality is, though, is that they haven't worked with the community to incorporate what would be a successful design. And I think that's really where we're at now, and why we've got 3 councillors, ward councillors, 1 county councillor, and 1 other member of the council opposing these plans. I don't think I've seen it before.
Any more questions? No? Thank you very much. Councillor McCormick. Good evening, Councillor McCormick. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. I'm speaking before the committee as a visiting councillor, but one has had experience of 3 regeneration schemes in my ward and was previously on the council from 2002 to 2012, and also as a local resident living just a quarter mile from the site. Winklebury Centre is slowly dying. When I first moved to Winklebury over 20 years ago, the shops were all let with the hairdressers, Winklebury Cycles, Cliffy Sandwich Caterers, Doctor Surgery, Pharmacy, newsagents, butchers, a dentist, and a 3 Barrels pub was open. Now, the centre has just 3 shops open, The dentist is still going. The surgery is a satellite at Shakespeare House, open 1 day a week if you're lucky. Talk about regenerating the Winkelbery Centre has been ongoing for the past 20 years. When the previous works on the communal buildings facilities were undertaken, installing new garbage chutes, gated access to communal areas and blocking off the pathway through the back of the shops. At this time, the council was good at regeneration. Oakridge Village had been a resounding success, and 3 schemes in Popley were undertaken and completed between 2005 and 2010 at Longfellow Parade, Maldive Road and the site of John Hunter Everest School. My experiences with the regenerations of Popley was that the developers were always trying to cut costs, impose large numbers of flats when one of the main reasons for regeneration was getting rid of the existing flats because nobody wanted to live there. There was always more land required for development. The number of properties built always exceeded the ones demolished, and crucially, if problems with the schemes weren't addressed right at the outset, you were stuck with that scheme for years to come. You only get one shot at regeneration, and you need to get it right first time. This is an ambitious set of proposals with mixed housing, flats, shops, healthcare and community provision. It's considerably more complex than the individual Popley schemes, which are mainly replacement houses and shops, with healthcare previously provided at Shakespeare Road, and Oakridge, which didn't have the healthcare either. There is risk associated with delivering a complex scheme, and one of those is that residents' expectations will not be met. For me, that is the key difference between the previous Popley Oakridge schemes and the Winkelbery one before you. The papers before you contain recommendation for approval, stating compliance with policies EM4, EM10, CN1, CN6, CN8, CN9 and SS2. There are submissions that show that scheme is contrary to policies SS2, CN6, CN7, CN8, CN9, EM1, EM3, EM5, EM10 and EM11. I have never seen a more one-sided set of papers containing arguments in refusal of a scheme, but as a committee you have to assign weight to each of the arguments and counter-arguments and arrive at a balanced decision based on planning law. I have 3 solid reasons for refusal.
SS2, just over 1 minute remaining.
SS2 regeneration. These plans have one glaring omission, the derelict Three Barrels pub. It's been empty over 10 years. It's in appalling and unsafe state. Children they had a child with a near fatal accident, recently electric shock. The question I would suggest members ask of the council is as follows. Should planning permission be given, will you compulsorily purchase Three Barrels pub? Policy C9 transport. With the pub and church still in place, this massively compromises parking arrangements in the plan to serve the future shops, 4 shop units, parking in close proximity to Winkelbery Way. The question I would ask is, what's the prospects of the church being included in any future scheme to give you better parking for the shops? And the third reason is policy EM10, delivering high quality development. It's pretty clear that the proposed scheme is not of a high quality based on the site constraints. The proposals as they stand do not deliver sufficient improvements to outweigh the loss of amenity. I don't envy you as a committee making a decision. If Winkelbery Centre doesn't get regenerated, it will die, but we only get one shot at this. The needs of the community must be borne in mind. If Vivid get planning permission, will they just stop where they are and not address the shortcomings? If that is the case, I'd recommend refusal. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Councillor McCormick? Councillor Phillimore.
Yeah, if the Winkelbery Centre is slowly dying, doesn't it deserve regeneration?
Yes, it does, but we deserve a better scheme than we've got in front of us tonight.
You mentioned a large number of flats. Are you not happy with the mix that we've got bungalows and 4-bedroom properties in this application?
I'm happy with the mix in as much as I know the futility of arguing against developments such as this at regeneration. The properties essentially fund the scheme.
And in the thing you sent out and you've read out to us today, you mentioned the pub and the church, but they're obviously outside the red line that we're considering tonight.
That is right, but there is always the option to include them. And one of the conversations that was had prior to the meeting was, if these proposals go ahead, then it will make it easier to CPO the pub, and presumably the church won't be CPO. There would be an agreement that would have to be made on its sale, but it would massively improve the scheme.
I live in hope of that. I live in hope of that, but I don't speak for the administration.
Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. Pointing to EM10, do you have a specific bullet point that is contravened by a specific aspect of the site that makes it not high quality? Because I've read through the bullet points and I can't see anything that really jumps out at me as a reason for refusal. So.
Well, I'll give you a number of examples. I think the visual impact of it, the fact that it's so high, when you've been there viewing, you would have seen the existing scheme is quite high. Parking and access, I mean, that's also CN9 that strays into, it's not functional. And the other thing I would think is just, you'll be developing part of it and only delivering a partial solution. It's not going to be high quality because you'll still have an eyesore of a pub and a church that's frankly in the wrong place, and it's giving you a suboptimal scheme.
Any more questions? No. Thank you very much. Councillor Freeman. Good evening, Councillor Freeman. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chair. Although all Winkelbury councillors and residents agree that there is a desperate need for regeneration, these plans fall far short of the needs and wants of the existing community. Winkelbury deserves a regeneration scheme akin to Oakridge and the Popley schemes, which were both community-led from the outset. This scheme has not been subject to positive community engagement and thus is contrary to policy SS2 on regeneration. Even though residents have consistently raised objections to these plans, with 15% of residents signing a petition against them, the plans have changed very little over that time. There has been little consultation with the retail outlets in Winkelbury Centre, and the dental surgery, who have many concerns, were not even aware of the regeneration plans until their patients asked them about it prior to the 2020 public consultation, even though they only signed their lease in 2018. The Winkelbury Regeneration Review Panel was set up by this council to try and involve the community in improving the plans, but these meetings mostly consisted of Vivid trying to justify why they couldn't improve their plans to any degree. It most certainly could not be classed as positive community engagement. Vivid have not demonstrated that they can work with councillors prior to this, so why should we believe they will do so in going forward? These plans will also see the loss of 100 trees, even though Vivid stated at the viewing panel that not many trees were being felled. This will have a significant adverse impact on the character of the area and is contrary to policy EM1. It is also contrary to policy EM5 and policy CN8. The existing open space and play facility at Carisbrooke Close would be lost to housing, and the alternative site proposed is in a far less accessible location, as highlighted in the response from Basingstoke and Dean's open space officer. Residents would need to travel further to the open space at Fort Hill than the council's current standards. In addition, the open space at Carisbrooke Close would be lost. The open space at Fort Hill is not new, as claimed in the proposals. Prior to the closure of Fort Hill School, the field was used by a large number of community groups and private residents in the evenings and at weekends. Plenty of teenagers met up there. People walked their dogs on the school field for many, many years prior to this. To sum up, Winkelbury deserves a regeneration, but it deserves better than this. The policies I have mentioned are not the only ones these plans are in contrary to. Other policies have been covered by previous speakers. But these plans do run contrary to many of our policies, and they offer very few benefits to the Winkelbury community. There has been considerable and consistent opposition to these plans from all ward councillors, many Mesney residents, and the Winkelbury Community Action Group. And as I said, we are not opposed to the regeneration. We need it, we want it, but not like this.
You have 1 minute remaining.
These plans are contrary to Policy SS2 regeneration, Policy EM1 landscape, Policy EM5 green infrastructure, and Policy CN8 community, leisure and cultural facilities. Please refuse this application. We have only one chance to make this a good thing for Winklebury. These plans fall far short. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Bound.
Hi, good evening. You've mentioned before, it's been mentioned by other councillors about the use of the Fort Hill site by local people. Was Fort Hill open then as a school area for use by the community?
It was indeed. It was a community centre prior to its closure, so in the evenings it was used by various community users of the centre and also by various residents. So I myself as a teenager used to meet my friends on the school field. We'd sit and chat or do various teenager things. It's been used for generations by the community, you know, and it's not new open space. It's space that we have lost since the closure of the school. And now they're trying to pretend it's something new when it's not. We've always been able to use there prior to the closure of the school.
So during sort of holiday time, for instance, was the school site open for, and then therefore being used by local people?
Indeed it was. There were various holiday play schemes for children there, various other community groups. It was open as a community centre during the holidays too. And even without the school being open, there was access to the playing fields. It wasn't a shut-off, closed site. You could get to the playing fields, and many people did. There were regular dog walks up there. So unofficial? Yeah, there was unofficial use, but like I say, it was open to the public. It wasn't a closed site.
Any more questions? I've got one. The Play Council site. Can you tell us what exactly that was and when it was last in use? Thank you.
It was a small community use building. They held, I took my own kids there to various gym groups and toddler groups there. It was originally, before the Play Council was built, it was the Boys Brigade that had a hut there. But again, it was a community use building that I couldn't tell you. It was a long time ago that it closed, but I'm not entirely sure when.
Thank you. No more questions? Thank you very much. Questions to officers? Yeah, let's start. Councillor Phillimore.
I've got a few, Chair. Do you want to do them individually or all in one go?
Let's do them individually.
Okay. First to the planning officer. Are there any material reasons that don't stand up to scrutiny given the application and officer report?
Councillor, I think on the basis our recommendation is for approval, our view would be no.
Can you confirm that over 100 square metres more community space is offered in the amended plans?
Yes, the community facility was increased to 271 square metres.
Can you confirm the Section 106 agreement includes funding for a community centre manager?
Yes, it does, yeah.
Can you confirm that building the surgery is material, the fact of it, but how it is run and what the OCB does within the building is not material? The only thing we need to be concerned with is that it's being built.
I can confirm that the standards that Councillor Compton-Burnett referred to are not planning policy. In terms of the internal layout, that would be down then to the medical practice that would go in there. What's shown on the plans is an indicative one, and I think that's what the Mr Waterfield said on the viewing as well. He confirmed that.
My last one is, can you confirm that the parking arrangements are acceptable and rejecting the application on parking will not stand up to scrutiny under appeal?
Thank you, Councillor. I think the issue of parking is one just worth spending a brief amount of time on, because it's obviously been raised a few times. I think the key thing is to remind the members to bring your decision back to planning policy. So in this instance, it's obviously the local plan and the parking SPD. The way that we've assessed the application as set out in the report, but I'll just go through it in a little bit more detail, is against the parking SPD. So taking it through the site, the Fort Hill, Carisbrooke Close and Union Bassett sites, I think, all meet the numerical parking standard in terms of the residential and in relation to Fort Hill, obviously the preschool parking. Our assessment is not suggesting that a potential over-provision on those parts can be used elsewhere within the site. That's not how we've assessed it. What we've looked at is that the approach to the Winkelbery Centre and former Play Council site, because of the mix of units, can potentially be used in a different way in terms of the times of day that people will park and the parking demand. And effectively that approach isn't disregarding the parking SPD. What it is simply doing is utilising what the SPD says, which is that each application will need to be considered on an individual basis, and in particular where numerically the parking issues are not met, developers will be expected to provide evidence to demonstrate the approach that's been taken. So in this particular instance, the approach that we've looked at is firstly the mix of uses, the fact that the types of uses are designed for local, mostly with local facilities in mind. So if you take, for example, the retail, we're not talking about sort of destination retail like a supermarket or out of town where you might have individuals driving to those sorts of locations. The second part is that the existing situation, as you'll have seen from the site visit, there is already an unallocated parking arrangement with a mix of uses in that place. And then the third, as detailed in the report, is the parking accumulation information submitted by the applicant, which is setting out the approach that's been taken, particularly relying on the 2011 census data, partly obviously because that is what the parking SPD is based on. And at this moment in time, the parking SPD in place is the one that you have to determine the application against, not what might come in future if census data is then taken into account in terms of updates. Finally, on that point, I think it's absolutely key that Hampshire County Council, obviously as a highway authority, have looked at all of those aspects. They've looked at the additional responses submitted, totally respecting the fact that people have different views, but the Highway Authority have confirmed that that parking arrangement, that approach to parking is acceptable. So returning, I suppose, to the question that Councillor Fillimore has raised, could you refuse it on parking grounds? My view would be firmly no, simply on that point, let alone then considering the planning balance of all the benefits of the scheme as well.
Thank you. Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. Could you comment that the County Council brought up the matter of the security fence? And I must say this has sort of slipped by me somehow. He was concerned about its removal. Could you comment on that, please?
I think the council was referring to the Harris fencing, the safety fencing that's around the site at the moment because it's a vacant site. That's all I can assume that he's referring to. The idea is, and it's been agreed with Historic England, is that there are benefits to opening up the scheduled monument to the public, having interpretation boards so that people can appreciate the fact that there's a scheduled monument in the middle of the town, which is quite unusual. And it's a hillside. So the Historic England have worked very closely with the applicants on this scheme. And see it as a positive benefit that you're not only opening it up to the public, but also as part of the proposals, securing a management and maintenance plan for the future, because at the moment, unfortunately, there's been no proper maintenance of the ramparts, but that would all be secured through the legal agreement.
So I misunderstood what he was saying. I sort of thought that there was a security fence there already, but there wasn't before the school was closed.
I mean, there may have been a school fence at the front, but apart from what we saw on site, which is the Harris fencing, and I think that's just to deter people going onto the site.
Councillor Hussey.
Thank you, Chair. I'm interested in the assertion that the medical facilities proposed for this application won't support the demands of the unknown at Manydown. is it relevant to this application that we should be considering the future medical needs of Manydown?
Thank you, Councillor. So I think the key thing, as always, is to consider the application and the impact of the application. In this particular instance, as you well know, the principle with planning is that you can't require development to provide more than what is necessary to serve the development itself. So planning shouldn't be used to effectively deal with existing deficiencies if there are any in the area. Policy CN6 is very clear on that because it talks about the needs of arising from the development itself. I think the issue of Manydown has been raised in the ICB's response, their consultation response, where they support the application. That said, I think that's simply the consultation response. It's not reliant, that part of it is not reliant in terms of our planning assessment of this application. Manydown in itself, just as an aside, has a Section 106 agreement which requires a health facility area to be considered and the needs assessed at that point in time once the development reaches a certain point in future. So in short, no, the Manydown element is not part of this application.
Sports England raised no objections subject to off-site contribution to mitigate loss of playing fields, and I've missed it in reading the report. Is there any proposal for off-site mitigation?
If I can just draw your attention to the update paper, and because it was an issue that was raised at the viewing. So on page 6 of the update, the contribution would go towards improvements to the Mugger area at Winkelby playing fields and pitch improvements to the Winkelby playing fields, and they're both in the latest playing pitch strategy.
Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. We've heard a lot about the policies that we've looking at. We are going through a local plan update. How much weight can I give those policies, or are they slipping away?
Sorry, Councillor, do you mean how much weight can you give to the emerging policies, or? Yeah. No weight at this time.
Any more questions for officers? Councillor Miller.
I'll defer to you in a minute.
Sorry, Chair, just one further one. On the parking, obviously you've alluded to the fact that they can have dual purpose parking. So the amount of parking, would you agree, will depend on who goes into those retail units? Because obviously if you have a takeaway, it's busy at 7 till 9. If a dentist will be quieter at night, obviously won't have the same number of residents. So can we assume that the dual use is what you are alluding to within the papers?
That is correct, Councillor. The one point of clarification, I suppose, is in terms of seeking to provide some control over that. There are conditions listed in terms of the retail being for retail, as opposed to any other uses, and the opening hours being restricted at this point to 7 till 6, to effectively deal with that. If in future, then that could be looked at again through planning application, so it'd have to come back to the council, but that is what's proposed in terms of these conditions.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to take up what was mentioned by the County Council earlier on about the design out crime officer and the statements that's made on page 67 of the report. I had a quick look through the conditions, and what he's recommending or even suggesting appears nowhere in the conditions for this particular application. Could the officers comment, please?
I think some of the comments that he's made, you can't really condition them out. With regards to the access to the rear gardens, there's a few that have them. And one thing that you could do is you could put a gate to the front, which is a keypad, which only residents have the number for, which I think that was one of his suggestions, but it's not something that we would normally condition.
Councillor Miller, one aspect that we have looked at in the past is that where points have been raised by consultees that are not possible to take forward in a planning condition, occasionally we have nevertheless referred applicants to those particular comments by way of informative on a decision notice, in terms of, can an applicant seek to engage further on those particular points, and that's perfectly legitimate to put that forward in terms of an additional informative.
Okay, thank you. And just, this is a kind of a question, but I would appreciate the comment. You mentioned that you do not recognise the National Health Service or the ICB's standards for the size of facilities for rooms, but a facility is being provided for a surgery. If we don't recognise the size, how do you know what size a medical facility is going to be built? Because if there are, say, 9 consulting rooms required and they have to comply with their requirements, surely those requirements should be recognised to build a facility big enough to take them. I couldn't really gauge, I couldn't really see how you can square that circle from the comments made by the officer.
I mean, all I can refer back to is the Integrated Care Board's comments that they're happy with what's being proposed, both in terms of the size and scale of the facility and also in terms of the parking provision.
Fine, thank you very much. Appreciate your answer. And going back to what Mike said, we can then not consider the mention of many down in that paragraph from them.
Yeah, I think, let's say Manydown has a separate Section 106 agreement in terms of how that would potentially deal with health. The eventual solution on this site will obviously depend in further detailed design that would involve the ICB at that point. I think the key thing in terms of this planning application is that a health facility is proposed, and that, in terms of planning balance, counts as a positive towards the scheme.
Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just make a request that next time the SPD parking document is up for review, that a note is added to it saying subject to most recent census data, because I resent the fact that our hands are tied by out-of-date information. It's clearly not going to be enough parking, but because we have a document that says it is, we're out of luck tonight. Whereas if there was some sort of adaptation that was made as new data becomes available that doesn't rely on a scheduled periodic update of the document, then we wouldn't be in this situation. So can that just be thought about aside from this application?
Councillor Taylor.
I just want to ask the slightly awkward question that we keep hearing, that the ICB are content and happy with everything that was said. But Councillor Compton-Burnett did mention that at the end of that submission they said, please don't use these comments. Is that correct?
I mean, it says that at the end of that, basically from a planning point of view, they're happy with what's being proposed in terms of the scale and the parking provision. They then go on to say, in terms of which sits outside of the planning system, in terms of their funding arrangements and various other things, that hasn't yet been secured. So I think I would read it in respect of that element of their letter, that they can only comment on one aspect in relation to the planning application, but there are other factors that sit outside of the planning system which haven't been agreed. Yeah, that's how I would read it.
Any more questions for officers? No? In that case, before we move to debate, I think 5-minute break. Thank you, councillors. We think have we got everybody back? Yes, great, right, debate. Councillor Phillimore, followed by Councillor Bound, followed by Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Okay, Chairman, as you stated at the beginning, we're dealing with a planning application in front of us. Whilst objectors, borough councillors, Hampshire County councillors would have preferred a better version of a planning application, we're dealing with what's in front of us. And for those reasons only, I can't see any reasons for refusing, so I should propose approval.
Thank you. I have a mover for approval. Is there a seconder? Councillor Hussey, thank you. Would you like to speak on that now, Councillor Hussey?
I've listened carefully this evening, and that there are a lot of negatives that people have mentioned. Some of them are not relevant to this application, and others contradict the advice of officers and the consultees that we have, such as Sports England and Highways. But there's still some negative remaining, even so. So I then had to look at what this scheme will bring to the area in terms of its regeneration, the facilities it brings, and the provision of affordable housing. And on balance, I must support the officer's recommendation, because I think this scheme brings far more than some of the negatives that have been mentioned. It's not a perfect scheme. Maybe we could do better, but that's not for us to decide. We're looking at this application, as Councillor Phillimore has said. On the basis of the evidence that we've seen tonight and heard tonight, I support this application.
Thank you. Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I compliment the councillors who appeared on behalf of their residents in Winklebury for the sort of passion that they showed in terms of what they felt about the scheme and why they didn't want it to go ahead. And in fact, there were 4 of them. And I thought that on behalf of their residents, that was very, very impressive. But like Councillor Phillimore and Councillor Hussey next to me, I think they were overlooking the good that this scheme would actually impart for the area. And they were also, I felt, looking back, as Councillor Hussey said, to a scheme that isn't in front of us. We haven't got that scheme that was brought forward in whenever it was, 2018-19. We have what's in front of us now. And I'm convinced by the arguments of the planning officer, which I thought was a very good report, by the way, setting out the reasons for approval, and I'm fully in favour of it, so I will be voting for this application.
Thank you. Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. I'm in the same mind as Councillor Bound. I think there's been lots of discussion this evening. The councillors have really tried to make their points as well as they can. I just don't think the policies necessarily support their conclusions. The strongest argument I've seen is maybe CN6 for refusal, and I just don't think that would stand up to scrutiny at appeals. So begrudgingly, I will be voting in favour of approval as well.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. I might take a little bit longer. I'm sitting here thinking this doesn't sound as if we're talking about a regeneration project at all. You'd expect an element of enthusiasm for it, but I mean, I don't see any at all. Local people and councillors have been expressing their hopes and their fears and their expectations and ideas from the very start, and I can't find a good enough evidence that they've been heeded at all. It's basically a development project with 1 or 2 extras thrown in. And I really do have to question the extent to which there's been any meaningful dialogue with the residents or anybody. I mean, we all know that consultation exercise is one thing, but it can so easily be a tick box. And I think it has been in this case, I really do. I mean, if I may just quote you the email that I was sent by the dentist over 3 years ago. We have a grave concern of losing our premises due to Vivid's plan to demolish the whole area, and we cannot find out how they are going to relocate our practice. We've been chasing them up for the last 5 months, and it seems we are hitting a wall every time we try to contact them. And I do feel that that's some of the, what I'm getting across from the councillors and the residents as well, that they've decided what they're doing, and it doesn't matter what you say, this is what we're actually going to do, and they've been battered away at everything. So the main thrust of what I'm saying is this: we are democratically elected councillors to listen to our residents and to serve them as best we can. And we've heard from 3 local councillors, cross-party, no politics involved. We've heard from the county council, we've heard from Councillor McCormick, we've heard from residents representing 800 and something Winkelbury residents. And unless planning policy actually dictates that we've got to accept this, and it doesn't, we've been given ample reasons in that very well-constructed extra document that we had that will allow us to refuse it. I think we have to refuse it. If this is approved tonight, it will establish Winklebury's character and layout for decades to come, and this is our one chance to get it right. It's an expedient and it's a convenient project, yes, and it throws up lots of flats, but that's really all. I mean, we see that crowded bit in the Winklebury Centre. Everything's squashed there, and our landscape team aren't happy with that. They say in their report that it's crammed. I mean, for goodness sake, we had a huge petition, was it 3 years ago, when the residents said, we want a community centre at Fort Hill. That's what we want. We want the community centre to spread out in that beautiful space that's Fort Hill. But that has been completely ignored. And I've got no idea why, but that's what the residents want. So when we look at the regeneration policy, SS2, has 2 elements to it. Regeneration proposals will be supported where they would result in a demonstrable benefit to the local community. I haven't heard the local community say that there's any benefit to them at all. They're not happy with it. And the preparation of proposals will require full involvement and consultation with the affected local communities. And we know that hasn't happened. We can't pretend that's happened. It just hasn't. That involvement hasn't taken place. And the demonstrable benefit just hasn't been proved. And I'd be failing in my duty to this town if I didn't vote against this one. We have to take time to get this right.
Thank you. Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. As has been pointed out by Diane Taylor and the local councillors, this has been a difficult application to look at. Firstly, because if you went there on Friday, you would see that some of those homes that people are living in look like Soviet prisons, frankly, with the iron bars in front of their houses. It is an appalling thing. And if regeneration is to do anything, it has to improve the living standards and living quality of the residents who live in a community. It's been accepted by all of us, I hope, that this community does need regeneration. It requires both money and effort, and as we have Vivid still sitting in the room, I think it is vital they don't just take this as a rubber stamp of what may happen, but they try to improve it as the process goes on. This shouldn't be seen as a full stop. It should be seen as a comma and a movement on, because we know as residents that your residents don't all love you for the way you deliver your social housing, and you need to take that on part. You have an opportunity not just to improve Winklebury, but to improve your reputation across Basingstoke and Deane. And I urge you to take that chance, because it is vital that we get better homes, better housing, where people feel as part of a new community, as part of an old community. And I have to be really honest with you, does it enthuse me what's in here? No, it doesn't. It doesn't make me go, wow, that's amazing. It makes me go, yes, it probably just makes the boundary of possibility. But there's a lot to be done here. This is not, in my view, where it should end. This is where it should start. You have a requirement to build better homes. both in terms of their adaptability to be lifetime homes, because the people who are going to be residents here, I want to be people who stay here for numerous years, so they know their next door neighbour, they share a cup of coffee. They shouldn't be transient, because that's what you've delivered in Winklebury so far, especially around the Winklebury Centre. So, although it's not perfect, should I throw out the good in pursuit of perfect? I have to come to the conclusion I won't do that. I've listened to councillors who I really respect, with Councillor Lee, Councillor Compton Burnett. These are people who have dealt with passion. I hope that you will use the time that is available to you while this process goes on to make sure consultation is not just a one-way street, but you listen to everybody who is involved and who cares about Winklebury. So yes, I will be voting with it with slightly a heavy heart. Thank you.
Anybody else who would like to speak before I put it to the vote? No? No further speakers. Been moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour of approval? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I make that 8. And those against? 2. The application is approved. Sue? Before I close, can we add the informative regarding the access to the gardens?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we can add the informative on that we've referenced the secure by design officer's comments. The officer's recommendation is for approval, subject to all of the amended conditions and updated recommendation on the update paper. And it's been approved.
Thank you very much, everybody. It's been not as difficult as I was expecting. Everybody's been very professional. Thank you. Good night.